This is the Real Estate Investing 365 podcast, your go-to source for real estate investing strategies so you can start living the life you want and get where you want to go. With your host, Justin Hanna.
Welcome, everybody. Another episode of Real Estate Investing 365. I got Nick Brown here. He lives in Maine, but is mostly doing investing in South Carolina, I believe. Is that right, Nick?
That's right. That's right. We've got a little portfolio in Maine now, but we are transitioning to a little bit more of a growth area and doing investing pretty much in between Charleston, South Carolina, and Columbia.
All right, cool. Well, why don't you go ahead and tell me a little bit more about yourself? I know you're in the Coast Guard. Thank you for that. And give us a little history, and then we'll move into the real estate.
Yeah, sure. I'm actually an attorney by trade. But I grew up in Mississippi and dropped out of college, joined the Coast Guard, ended up finishing college while I was in the Coast Guard. But while I was stationed in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Miami, California, and then back in Portland, Maine. And when I was stationed in Portland, I actually met my wife, and she convinced me to stay. And so I ended up staying and building a life here. And we, one of the things that, we were always attracted to was health and fitness. And so I got out of the Coast Guard the same year that my wife was accepted into physical therapy school. And so she went to physical therapy school at UNE, and I started our first gym in 2011. And that was in Rockport, Maine. I was renting the space. My wife was going to school. We were basically living in a 10 by 10 room in the gym. Didn't have a shower. And so every night at the end of the day, we would go down to the town landing and pay 4 quarters for 7 minutes of hot water and take a shower, come back. And we had a little 2-stove burner grill. And so we would, stir fry some stuff, or I actually had a propane grill. We would grill out that way. We did that pretty much for 15 months. And during that process, I found my first real estate deal. I hated paying rent. I was paying $1,444 every month, and I hated it. And so I was always looking for, and I'd read Rich Dad Poor Dad when I was like 18, and so I knew I wanted to get into real estate. But really hadn't explored it much since then. I'd read the E-Myth, and so I had a good idea what I wanted to do. I just had no idea how to do it. And so one of our members at the gym was into real estate. He was always coming in around like 10 o'clock. Drove a BMW. Super smart guy. And I was like, what do you do, man? Like, what is your day to day? And he's like, well, I'm in real estate. I put deals together. And so I found this building. It was a much better location than where I was renting. And I told him about it. I was like, hey, how do I get this building? And he said, well, go to the town and ask and figure out who owns it. I said, okay. So I did that. And then I figured out who owned it. And his name was Peter Simpson. Never forget him. And so I went back. And he ended up becoming my mentor. And so I went to him. I was like, hey, I found out who owned it. He's like, well, find out who has the mortgage on it. And so I went to the town, went to the registry of deeds, and Key Bank had the mortgage. And he said, well, try to figure out if you can get in touch with their loss mitigation department. So I messed around with some touchstone dialing with Key Bank, finally got a hold of somebody that could answer some questions. And I said, hey, I'm interested in this property. Can you tell me what's going on? And they said, well, we're trying to foreclose on it, but we haven't been able to properly serve him. And so the judge isn't letting the case move forward until we properly serve him, and we can't find him. And I said, okay, well, would you be interested in selling the note? And that's what my mentor told me to say. I really had no idea what that meant. Yeah. So at the time, at least. And so I just said that. She said, yeah, what's your offer? I was like, well, I don't know. I got to call you back. So I called my mentor right away, and I'm like, hey, they're interested in selling the note. What do you think I should offer? And he said, well, what do you think it's worth? I said, well, 80 grand. He said, offer 50. So, and it was such a low offer for this place that I just wanted to bust out of my skin. I felt so weird about it. But called him back and offered him 50 grand. We ended up negotiating and ended up getting it for 60.
So all this is
And
without ever talking to the actual owner yet? You were just talking to the bank?
so I was talking to the bank, but through that process, I had got on Facebook and I searched Peter Simpson, and he came up. He was right there. He was in the British Virgin Islands as a boat mechanic. And apparently he had just left everything. He had left his house. This house was actually being foreclosed on as well, and this particular commercial property. So he just left. And so I sent him a message on Facebook and said, hey, I'm interested in your property, here in Rockport. Would you be interested in working out a deal? And he got back to me right away. Like, yes, absolutely. Whatever you want to do is fine. And so my mentor, he put me in contact with an attorney. We basically worked out a deal with a bank to where we would purchase the note. And then our attorneys typed up a deed in lieu of foreclosures where he transferred the deed to me, and then I forgave his debt. And after FedExing a couple of documents back and forth, we had the property. And my wife and I had saved every dime, like through that, for the first 14 months of having the gym. We were super, super frugal. And we both had a little bit of money saved up. And so we were actually able to pay cash for the building. And I convinced a local bank to give me an additional $250,000 to basically build out our gym. And so they went on board with it, which was phenomenal. We talked to probably 8 or 9 banks. Nobody would lend us money. We were 24, 25 at the time. We'd only been in business for 14 months. And so the loan officer really took a chance with us and lent us the $250. I think that was his max. The banks, they have different pay grades. They have authority or a little bit more discretion to rent up to a certain point. And his point was $250. And so he took it. He rolled the dice on us. Gave me a little pep talk. Was like, dude, I'm taking a chance on you. Don't screw me. And so. And we did, and we busted our tail. And so with that property, we built with $250,000. We built a gym, which was 4,000 square feet. And then on that property was already a duplex. And so we renovated the duplex and lived in the top, rented out the bottom. And then in the gym, we built out some extra spaces for a chiropractor, for a physical therapist. The plan was for when my wife got out of school, graduated from physical therapy school, she would sort of transition into taking over the gym and providing physical therapy. And so we built out some extra spaces to account for that. And that was our first deal we did in 2013. We moved in, I want to say we moved in to the new gym, tax day, April 15th of 2014.
Sweet. So did you end up getting the property for 50 grand? Is that what the bank finally negotiated on?
We ended up getting the whole property for 60 grand. And then we took an additional $250,000 loan out. And then our parents chipped in, our parents loaned us a little bit of money to help finish the project. It was our first deal. So we got 75% of the way through and ran out of money. And so our parents really pulled through, and they took a second, they took a note against the property. And so we paid them off, over the course of a few years. And so we were all in, I think, for around $350.
Okay.
For the 4,000 square foot building and the duplex.
Man, originally though, what a deal for 60 grand from the bank. I mean, even if it was in rough shape, for a 4,000 square foot commercial building and a duplex on the property. And then you got to move out of the small gym, and then you guys actually had a place with like a shower and stuff.
Oh, it was weird.
Yeah.
We were like, oh man, we have an actual stove now. We have a big refrigerator.
Yeah.
It was nice. My wife had enough, and my wife's a trooper. I mean, she's amazing. She's
Sounds like it.
The hardest working person I know. But after 14 months of a 10 by 10 room with no showers and no, a dorm room fridge, she was like, all right, it's time.
Yeah, I assume. So that's cool, man. So you guys move into that, you move out of your old place into this new spot. Did the renovation include fixing up the duplex a little bit, or is it just for the gym?
No, so we actually took some of the 250 and renovated the duplex as well.
Oh, cool.
I did a lot of that work myself. I framed houses a couple of summers when I was a kid, and so I was familiar. I was comfortable with tools, and my dad came up and helped me, build some stairs, build a deck. I hired out the drywall, hired out all the cabinets and countertops. But I mean, I laid all the flooring, we did all the paint, we did all the trim, we hung some doors, we put in new windows, we did all the installation. So it was a do-it-yourself project. But I mean, we were working until 1, 2 a.m. To get that to bring that project to fruition.
Yeah,
And
sounds like a
so
lot.
it was pretty intense couple of years for sure.
That's cool.
But we were
So
able to do it pretty much on budget just by sweat equity.
did you end up renting out the other half of the duplex?
Yep. So we rented out the bottom, lived in the top for a couple of years. And then not long after that, my wife graduated from physical therapy school. And so the same year she graduated from physical therapy school, she took over the business, took over managing the rental property, and I went to law school.
Okay.
And so we flip-flopped essentially. And so and so that property, we were all in for, the only debt on the property was $250,000. And so by 2016, that property appraised for, I want to say 480. And so we were able to cash out refi, basically, take out 75% of 480, which left it at about 350. So we took out $100,000 in cash out refi proceeds to really serve as a foundation for our next project. And our next project was our house. My wife was like, all right, she lived in a 10 by 10 room. She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. And she was like, okay, it's time we need to build a house. And so I was in law school. During my second year of law school, we basically built our own house. And we weren't necessarily that wasn't really the goal. We just found an amazing piece of property. We were driving, anytime we're riding around, my wife and I are both looking at real estate. And at this particular time, we were looking for a house. And so we found this amazing property right up against the state park, right outside of town. And it was an estate sale. The guy had passed away. His family lived in California and Florida, and they didn't really care about the property. And so, but it was listed, just not very efficiently. It was terribly marketed. And so, we were able to go in and negotiate a deal where we bought the land pretty cheap, and at the same time took out a residential construction loan, used $100,000 that we had from the refi proceeds to basically build our house while I was in school. And the schedule, so I didn't want to pay, to build a house up here is anywhere from $250 to $350 a square foot. I was like, there's no way that's happening. And so I found a carpenter who had a weird schedule because I was in school Monday through Thursday. I was off on Fridays. And so what we would do is I would drive home after school on Thursdays. We would work Thursday afternoon. We'd work all day Friday, work all day Saturday, work all day Sunday. And I was able to just pay him his rate, which I think was like 30 or 35 bucks an hour. And so there's no general contractor, none of that. Just me and him banging it out. Now we did have plans. And so we did have a plan for the building, but we got it framed up, got it buttoned up, got all the doors, windows in. I roofed it pretty much by myself. And then my dad's like my savior. He came up, he and I did all the plumbing. And then a buddy of mine was an electrician. He'd been an electrician for a couple of years. I just hired him as a side job. He came up, him and I did all the electric. And then we hired out all of the drywall, countertops, cabinets, all that. But then we painted everything. We put most of the trim in. I did all the flooring. And so at the end of that project, we finally finished. It took us about a year, but we ended up building the whole thing, for like $84 a square foot. Which was just pretty good deal. But we used this. There was a house there previously, and so we tore that out, but we used the same footprint. So all the leach field was already there. The well, there was a lot of plumbing already there. We put a new foundation in, but there was a really good infrastructure already in place that saved a ton of cash.
Right.
And so from there, we basically, the house ended up appraising. Not long after that, the house ended up appraising for, much more than $84 a square foot. So we're able to take basically a credit line, home equity line of credit against the house to roll into our next deal.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's, I always say, your primary residence isn't really an investment until you sell and make money. But even
it's an investment in your marriage.
Yeah. Right. And so, but in this case, for one, you're making your wife really happy because she's tired of putting up with all your shenanigans for a couple of years. But two, you were able to put sweat equity into it and work your butt off and then build it at such a cheap rate that, it appraised for way more. So, there's a million different ways to do investing in real estate, right? So I would think that counts as well.
Yeah, I mean it was, and my wife's a trooper too. I mean, she was there right beside me working,
right.
way harder than I was. I mean, she's the draw. There's a funny in our house. I find the deals and I get them started, and she's the one that actually gets them done, them finished. Because I'm already done. I'm already to the next deal, like halfway through.
Yeah.
And so she's amazing that way. She keeps us focused, at least with our internal portfolio. We have a few units that just we own, but which is a little bit different than the portfolio we have with other investors and my other partner. But anyway.
Yeah. No, that's so funny. My wife's the same way. At one of our duplexes, she would always go over there. I'd be working all the time and I'd work on the weekends there. And then at nights after I got home from work, since I'd been working all day, she would drive over to the duplex and she'd paint at nights. And then when we were remodeling the second unit, this is a quick story, but I think she was pregnant with our oldest daughter. And I was like, oh, honey, you don't need to go over there at, 9:00 at night and be doing this. So on the weekend, I went over there and I started painting. I got like an hour in. I'm like, screw this. I called a painter. I called a painter and had a guy come over and hire it. And she's like, you've been having me come over here for 6 months painting the other unit. And then you do it for one day and you hire a painter. I'm like, well, I was busy, honey. I just had other stuff to do. It's funny. So, but yeah, same way. So, okay. So you had this. So at this point, now you have your commercial property with your gym. Were you guys leasing out the chiropractor space, and then your wife started her physical therapy business in there as well?
Yeah. And so we were using the space for physical therapy care, for chiropractic care, massage therapy care. And my wife was doing a hybrid between, she was doing some physical therapy and some personal training. She really found a lot more enjoyment in the personal training side. It's just a different mindset. You've got, it's really on the preventative side. And I think she enjoys the preventative stuff much more, than the post-surgery or whatever. But, or she enjoys getting people back to their sport. Like there's some really good mountain bikers, some really good skiers up in this area, and some amazing triathletes. And so working with those guys once they've been injured or they're recovering from an injury, she loves working with those guys. And so it's been sort of a hybrid. It's not a traditional physical therapy practice, as it's traditionally, thought of.
Yeah, no, I could imagine that too, especially you're working with people that are trying to make progress and like excel at their sport as opposed to people who are just like going to physical therapy because their insurance says they have to go and they're never really going to do anything fitness wise anyway. So
right.
I can understand
it's a totally different mindset with those folks that she's working with. And I think that's what she caught into pretty quick was she wanted to work with motivated people and she sort of carved out her own, niche for that.
Yeah, that's cool. So since you didn't really know anything into this process of buying that first property, but you found a guy that ended up being your mentor and you went through the steps. You didn't know anything, but you just kept digging and kept pursuing it and asking more questions and moving on and on. What is like a big mistake that you might have made in this process that going forward you don't make anymore?
Planning, you really got to have your systems in place. I mean, now I know exactly what kind of countertop, I know exactly what kind of flooring, I know exactly what type of counters we're going to use. Whereas I was sort of shooting from the hip in the beginning. If I would have taken just a day, a week of actual planning, exactly what I needed to do, and just thinking through the process, I could have saved myself months. And also building a relationship with a builder. I was relatively new to the area, so I didn't know anybody. The first contractor that I worked with, he wanted $50,000. So we talked through the deal, and we talked through everything. We wanted to build the commercial space, and then we also wanted to renovate the duplex. And we started off, it was just demolition. And he wanted like 50 grand deposit. And I just wrote him the check. I was like, okay, sure. So I just wrote him a check for 50 grand. And that was a huge mistake. He got a little bit done, but I noticed like the next week he was driving like a brand new Duramax, and I'm not saying he committed, I'm not saying he did anything, but it was a huge red flag. And, you don't need any money to do demolition. You don't need a deposit for demolition.
Right.
And I would never, ever do that again. And so I would just, and we haven't used him since. And so I would really vet your carpenter, and I would even consider getting a construction manager. I mean, there are if you're new to it, there are construction managers out there that they just specialize in logistics. They're not out there hammering nails. They just help you organize your contractors or your builders with your electrician, your plumbers, your finish guys. Because for me, I just thought I knew, well, we got to get this done. And then the next step seemed pretty intuitive. And I was just stubborn and stupid enough not to see what I didn't know at the time. And I would certainly recommend hiring actually a professional. They're worth the 8% you're going to pay, because they're going to be able to get it done a couple of months faster. They're going to be able to get it done way more efficiently, and they're probably going to save you money. Whereas you can sort of bum your way through it like I did. And I probably lost 4 or 5 months of rent by just trying to do everything myself. And so the offset, the extra stress, the extra time I spent doing it by myself, was completely offset by how much longer it took. So it's just an analysis that I would certainly consider going into it.
Right. Yeah. I never thought about that, hiring a construction manager as kind of like a fiduciary type role or something. Hopefully they will act in that manner anyways to help organize the generals. Everybody just thinks, oh, just go hire a general contractor and the general will do it. But, if you get a guy like that that's asking for 50 grand up front for demo, it's like, maybe he's not.
Yeah, I would never do that again.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, cool. So, I guess, did you end up keeping that property, or you end up selling it, or what happened to it?
We still have that property today. And we ended up starting another gym in 2013, not long after we moved into that building, and sold that gym. And then we recently partnered up with some guys that took over all the classes, and we're more in a landlord role. And so they essentially are growing the classes. They're doing a great job, but we're sort of stepped back, more of just an oversight landlord type role. My wife still has her practice, in there. She's there every day, but it's more like a partnership rather than just a clean buyout.
Yeah.
And so we were able to find a hybrid that worked for everybody.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, it sounds like it worked well, and you're making it happen there. And especially going in there with not knowing anything. I mean, you made it such a good deal out of it,
Well, I had some help, we had some people around us that were giving us some good advice. Our parents were great, and my mentors making sure I didn't mess up too bad. And so there were some other people that were certainly shepherding us.
Yeah. I'd like to know the guy's story, the previous owner. It's like he just gives it. He's in Maine. He's cold all the time. He's like, screw it. I'm out of here. I'm going to the Virgin Islands or wherever, British Virgin Islands. I'm just going to start a new life. It's like a movie.
I know. He just took off. I mean, all of his pictures were like him laying out by the pool or working on a boat or on a sailboat. I mean, he just like, enough is enough.
Had enough. Left his family behind, maybe. Who knows?
There's no telling.
No telling. Huh. Okay, cool. So where are you at now? I know you started an investment firm, right, called Avery Investments, and you guys are doing some other stuff.
That's right. So right now, I own 55 multifamily units and 3 commercial units. That certainly didn't happen overnight, but it's happened relatively quickly. So I graduated law school and went to a firm and just hated it. Billing hours, trying to build a client list, and I'm looking around and all the partners there, they've been there for like 40 years and they're still there billing hours. Like this, there's just no way this is going to be me. And so one of my clients at the gym had a pretty cool thing going from what I could tell. He had started his own law firm and he'd been practicing for like 15 years. And he also owned a lot of real estate and had a assisted living company. So he was CEO of the assisted living company and practicing law. And so I actually called him. I wanted to do an internship. And I asked him if I could come intern at his law firm. And he said, yeah, that's fine. Sounds good. And I busted my tail here during the internship. Well, because I really knew I wanted to come work for him. I just was trying to play it cool, And so ended up going back after the internship, went back to school, taking the job at the big firm for a second. And then I called him and said, hey, can we go, can I take you out for a round of golf? And so we played a round of golf, like 3 beers and 3 holes in, he offered me a job and said, you know what, man, we'll figure it out. Just come work for me. We will, you can work you'll serve as counsel for the healthcare company. You can also build your client list. We'll figure it out. And so I did. I left, came work for him. And, that was the best decision that I possibly could have made. I mean, he's an amazing dude, really good leader, but also has the foresight to sort of let people grow and make mistakes and figure it out. And one of the ways he did that was, he knew I was into real estate. And so to meet my minimum, to cover my hours, I had to bill like 50 grand a year, 50 grand a year to cover the overhead. That paid for assistant, that paid for paralegal, that paid for office space. And then after that, pretty much was an equity split, and so I just went to him and I was like, hey, do you care how I get you the 45 grand? And he's like, no, I mean, like, I don't really care as long as as long as it's legit, you're not like selling drugs and, you're getting your work done. He's like, I don't care how you bring it in. I was like, well, there's this deal out here. There's a multifamily that I like to buy. It's a really good deal. And I think that we could make some pretty significant cash with it. And I'd found this 9 unit. It was a phenomenal deal. It was a bank foreclosure deal that was just an incredible opportunity. And so I went to him. We got it under contract for $575. And I just went to him and I said, hey, why don't you put down the down payment? I'll do everything. I'll manage it after hours. I'll rent it. I'll take care of everything. I'll pay you, a percent on your preferred return on your investment. And then once you get all your cash back, we'll split it 50-50. And he said, yeah, that sounds good. It was really the same deal we had on the law firm. It's just a different vehicle for generating revenue, right? And so he went for it. He put the down payment down. We bought the building. I started paying him a return, and it was a value add opportunity. And so essentially 13 months later, we had it set up ready to refi. He got all of his money back. and then we split it 50-50. And that was the next deal that I've done. And then shortly after that, I put together a 7-unit deal, which was, we actually bought from him, my boss. He was looking to get rid of it because he was moving, and I had a buddy that lived where the property is, and we put together the deal, ended up buying it from him, and my buddy has since went in, increased rents. We've added some value, and after, and then last year there was another commercial property. It was actually originally an 11-unit. I went back to Chad, my boss, and I said, "Look, here's another deal. We follow the same structure. Basically, he puts down the down payment, I pay him a preferred return, and then at the end, when we cash flow, once we refi it out, he gets all his money back, and we split it." Well, we did that a few times, and we're sitting there talking, and we're like looking at each other like, we've got to go full board with this real estate side. I mean, we're creating long-term wealth. Our cash flow is way more than we would be billing hours for, and so we decided to go all in on the real estate, and that was where Avery Investments was birthed. So we started syndicating deals. We put together a commercial property, started raising money.
Real quick, before we move on to that, let me ask you about these properties that you'd bought. Were these 3 that you'd bought with him, were these all in Maine?
These were all in Maine. And so it's a 9-unit, 7-unit, and 11-unit, all in Maine.
How did you end up finding those properties? Because you said they were, like the 9-unit was a foreclosure deal, off market, right?
Yeah. So I was actually in the bank. I was going to Rockland Savings Bank, just like 10-second walk from my office. And I was going there to get savings account documents for a client. One of my clients was having to produce some discovery. And so I was going there to get her bank statements. And I walked in, and Rockland Savings is such a tiny bank that you walk in, and right as soon as you walk in the door, the CEO is sitting there. And they had recently replaced the CEO. He was a guy who had worked with me on a previous deal on the gym. He had been promoted and been selected for CEO of this bank. So I walk in, I'm like, "Hey, Todd, how you doing? What do you, how's the new job? How's everything going?" And then eventually, like, "Hey, you guys got any deals you get out there? You guys got any property you're trying to get rid of?" And he said, "Actually, yeah, I got this property I'm trying to get rid of. My goal for the first year is to get all these foreclosures off our balance sheet. I was like, let's go look at it right now." And he said, "Okay." So we hopped in the truck, went and looked at it. I mean, we got there were needles in the parking lot. There were people hanging out at like 10 a.m. smoking weed. It was a great area, a great spot, but the building the bank had been managing it, and they had been doing nothing. These people had not paid rent for 9 months. The trash was everywhere. I mean, it was just destroyed.
Right.
But underneath all that was a beautifully constructed 2015 building that before that, the building had burned down. And the owner had like $1 million check from the insurance company and just handed it over to a general contractor. And the general contractor, thankfully, had a ton of integrity and built he just handed him a check, and he made all the decisions. The general contractor made all the decisions. The owner was nowhere to be found. And so he had this insurance money. He built this 9-unit. It has 48 solar panels. It's a completely passive house built. It's got 12, it's double studded. So it has R50 in the R50 insulation in the walls. It has R70 insulation in the ceiling. It has triple pane windows from Canada. I didn't even know triple pane was a thing. It's got hardy plank concrete siding. It's a beautifully constructed building. It's got hardwood flooring. It's got granite countertops. It's phenomenal. And after they built it, the guy just sort of put whoever in there, paying like $800 a month. And then he just ditched it. He basically took their security deposits, took the first month's rent, and just left. And then bank eventually, over the course of time, took over because he never paid a dime on the mortgage. Bank ended up taking it over, going through that whole process. And I sort of caught them at a good time in the process because we The day we went and looked at it, I put in an offer. I said, we'll buy 550 right now. And he said, can you close in 30 days? I said, yes. I didn't know yet. I hadn't even talked to Chad yet. I just had a really good feeling that we could do this. I thought he would go for it. And he said, if you do 575, close 70 days, close in 30 days, we'll do it. And so I said, all right, let's type it up. So we had a purchase and sale signed. And then he said, look, I've got to take it to market. I gotta take it to market for at least one day to at least check a box. And so took it to market, and we had it under contract for 575. It's my understanding that he got some offers for like 750 after when it actually went to market. And so we were under the gun to close in 30 days. We ended up pulling through, getting it done, but
that's crazy.
Deal. The 7 unit. So Chad, my boss, he owned that. He owned that portfolio. He owned that 7 unit. He was looking to sell it. So that was just, I found that deal by walking into his office and talking to him about it. And then the 11 unit was a LoopNet deal. I'd been sitting on LoopNet for probably 2 years, and it was an old captain's house, or actually it was an old frat house. So the University of Southern Maine is right there nearby the campus, and these frat guys had just trashed the place. Well, I knew, let me back up. I was looking for a particular building for a client or for a tenant because I was friends with the tenant. He was running a sober living house in some other areas. He owned 5 sober living houses, and he was looking for a room to expand. And so basically he said, listen, this is the deal. If you can find me a location, I will rent from you. And we sort of worked out the terms before I even had a building. And as soon as so I started looking for a building for him. So I found this building, and as an 11 unit, it was overpriced. It didn't make any sense. But as a triple net commercial building, it made a lot of sense. And so we went in, bought this frat house. They essentially moved into the captain's house, and now they have, I think, 24 beds in there running it as a sober living facility. And that investment's going phenomenal. That property also has a duplex, but I rented it out to him triple net. The whole property's triple net. He pays everything. We have some CapEx expenses that we set aside for, but that was a little bit different of a deal. We took an asset that everybody else was looking at in the multifamily, context, and by bringing in a different type of tenant, turned it into more of a commercial space, it just completely flipped the equation on its head and made a lot of sense at the LoopNet asking price, which we ended up paying like $5,000 below asking price on LoopNet. So
okay. So for those that don't know, can you explain what triple net is?
Yeah, so a triple net lease essentially means it's a commercial lease that you would typically find with a credit tenant like Rite Aid, Walgreens, McDonald's, which they own all their own real estate anyway, but Olympia or Starbucks, and essentially that means that they take care of everything, and so your rent is net of taxes, insurance, sometimes even CapEx. Triple net's sort of weird in some places with CapEx. But traditionally they pay all the maintenance, all the cleaning, all the landscaping. They pay for everything. So
it's a
including taxes and insurance. So
hands-off way to lease to or rent to a tenant, right? This is kind of like a self-managing tenant. They do all their own repairs. Hey, or for the most part, you guys take care of everything. You just send me the check at the end of the month.
Right. And I mean, the lease builds in certain criteria they have to follow. They have to have it. It's got to be like a certified contractor. It's got to have, certain vendors that we allow them to work with. I don't want them bringing in Joe Schmo to do a new roof that ends up having to be replaced. And so there's some protection built in, but for the most part, yes, they do most of the self-management.
So how come that made so much more sense to do it triple net than it would to just rent it out per 11 unit? Is it because you're charging them more per unit because they're having multiple people in each unit, or just because your overhead's strictly lower?
Yeah, because the overhead is much lower. In this particular building, in the 9 of the units, there's one heating system, there's one electric system, there's um, one HVAC system, and so that adds up pretty quick. I mean, the heating cost. I mean, I would say the heating costs were $600-700 a month. 10 grand in heating. Electric was, I know it was 5 or 6 grand because all the hot water was electric. Um, taxes were, I want to say 8 grand. Insurance was 4 grand. And so you're adding all that back into your bottom line, renting at a market rate rental.
Cool. Okay. So one thing that keeps coming up over and over again from everybody I talk to is that the networking part, just like not being afraid to ask questions, not being afraid to talk to people. It all kind of, a lot of this started by you wanting to move out of your small gym and living in a 10 by 10, and you found a property, you didn't know what to do. So you found somebody that ended up being your mentor just by asking them questions, and you finally got a loan for the property because you went to a bunch of different banks and just, you didn't stop, right, until you found somebody. And that guy ended up being the guy that was the CEO of this future bank that ended up bringing you to the 11 unit, right? It's just like, if you don't talk, you don't network, you're never going to get anywhere. You can't just sit there in a hermit shell. But it's great. It's a great story, right?
Yeah, I really never thought about it like that. My wife. My wife and I laugh because my wife is like such. I mean, she's amazing, but she is a rule follower. She she's always followed the rules. She's like squared away rule follower. And
Yeah.
I've never been a rule follower. And she's like, oh, I guess this is another Nick Brown thing. Like the rules don't apply to Nick. And I've sort of taken that, and none of, I mean, when she says it, she's just sort of making fun of me, which is hilarious. But I don't hear no. I don't ever hear the word. I don't ever hear no. I just hear, well, I'll find somebody who will. I never. So if I put it in that context, like, well, there's a way to do this. I've just got to peel enough layers to figure it out. And that's how all these deals have been. Nothing's been easy. Nothing's been straightforward. I never bought a property off, listed that just went smooth and went according to plan. There's always been hurdles, hard questions that, I think it's pretty normal. Like you talk to people that have built a portfolio, it's just problem solving and trying to figure out and just not accepting no.
Yeah.
Just figuring out, okay, well, that's just a data set. Now I know not to go to the person for that. So
That's cool. Good job, man. That's awesome. And then you moved up into the syndication leagues, and tell us a little bit about that. You got a bunch of units under contract and in South Carolina, right?
right. And so, our traditional investing was save up, buy a property. Hopefully you can, if it's value add, then hopefully you can, add some value, get your money back in 18 months and do it again. But unless you're sitting on, a bunch of money, that model is hard to scale, as fast as I wanted to. In real estate, nothing ever happens fast enough, right? I mean, we all know going in that it's a long-term game, but at the same time, as every other entrepreneur I'm sure can attest, like nothing happens fast enough. And so we started reaching out to some investors who we thought would invest. I wrote down the top 50 people that I thought would invest. I put together a deal. We went out and I started putting some feelers out, talking to people about what they might be interested in, if they would do a deal with us, and how much they would be interested in investing, what their investment horizons were. Just try to gauge our inner circle to figure out what kind of deal we could put together. And I found the safest, best deal. I'll take it back. I did say earlier that a deal has never been easy. This deal was easy. It was a 15,000 square foot commercial space. An accounting firm had been there for 20 years. And it cash flowed 13% cash on cash return. It's a 7-year horizon. Basically, after 7 years, we will amortize enough debt to get to refinance out, get all the investors their money back, plus about an extra $100,000, and then they're going to hold equity on the back end. But with that being said, the top 50 people on my list, nobody invested. Nobody.
Huh.
We ended up we needed to raise 500 grand for this deal. And I ended up raising the money from people I never really thought would do the deal. It's pretty amazing how a lot of people want you to think that they have money, that they are rolling in the dough.
Oh yeah.
But when it comes time to like write a check, all the excuses are going to come out, and whatever, that could be me. Maybe they just didn't want to do a deal with me. That's I'm sure there's somebody out there that they hit it off with, but we ended up making a ton of connections, and it just led to one meeting would lead to another meeting. One meeting would lead to another meeting. I mean, I bet I was in 100 coffee shop lunches trying to raise 500 grand for this deal. And we did it. We did it. It took every bit of the 90 days that we had to close to do it. But it sort of gave me the confidence that, okay, we can do this. We found 10 investors, all put in 50 grand, sold shares so 10 shares at 50 grand each. But it wasn't, nothing about that was easy. That was really the hurdle. The deal was easy because everything went pretty smooth on the deal side.
Yeah.
But introducing a new factor, raising money, there was nothing easy about that.
So how did the conversation kind of go when you're kind of reaching out to somebody that you don't know real well? How does that conversation transpire to end up asking them if they want to invest in some, it's your first syndication deal. You've never done it before. How do they come to trust you and say, oh yeah, here's a check for 50 grand?
I would say it evolved. Because the first time I just hopped on the phone and just started chatting about the deal. And I think I just talked too much and got it, talked in circles, probably made a bunch of mistakes, and just sort of talked through the deal and how I was thinking about it. And they didn't invest, and I spent an hour and a half on the phone with them, probably making every mistake in the book. And then I was like, all right, trying to reflect a little bit on what I could do better, how I need to pitch this, what's going to instill confidence, and just sort of started thinking about what the investor would want to hear. And so the next conversation, I started off super simple. I said, you're going to make 13% cash on cash return every month, and you're going to be in this investment for 7 years. And I just would go, and I would just be silent.
Yeah.
And they'd say, oh, and I just let them talk. Like, okay. And then, and let them talk about themselves. I mean, make them feel good. Like make them, it's just like dating, really. Make them feel pretty, make them feel good. And that's the approach I took. Just blanket deal. And then as they had more questions, then I would start answering the questions. But I tried to I didn't want to, I sort of let them sort of feel it out. I went at their flow instead of trying to push my flow onto them.
Right. That's cool. That's it. That's exactly it. And it's more talk. I think they talk about that in that book. What is it? Never Split the Difference or something like that. Right. Where it's
Chris
like
Voss. I love that book.
Chris Voss, you'd say it and then you quiet. So that the awkward silence happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But it's not even that awkward because they'll feel it,
Yeah.
They'll chat.
That's cool. So then how did you kind of learn, I guess you're an attorney and then your partner's done other real estate deals, right? Or your boss or whatever he is, your managing partner.
Yeah, I'm a employee and a partner. It's a little bit of a hybrid. It's a good spot. I mean, he's awesome. So
how did you guys know, the proper steps to take? Did you hire another real estate attorney to write up the syndication agreements and, do the filings with whoever you had to do the filings with?
Yeah. So I know a bunch of the real estate attorneys. We had some templates. I put together a ton of real estate deals for clients. And so, attorneys know attorneys. And so I just reached out to a few of my attorney friends that had put together syndications before, asked them to send me over the templates that they used. And I just sort of looked at how they had organized in the past. And then it's really no different than any other contract that I drafted. It's just, making sure that everything is how you want it for your particular deal.
Right.
And so a little bit of minor changes here and there, but every set of documents that I look forward with, that state of Maine governed, was pretty consistent. And so the paperwork side of it wasn't that hard, but I am, trained attorney, so I have a little bit different lens I'm looking through.
Right. Is there any? So this is kind of off of our normal question, but is there anything that they could or that somebody coming into this, what's some specific questions they should ask? Because not all attorneys are great, right? And not all attorneys know just everything that they need to know that you would think they would know anyways. What's some good questions that somebody should ask to vet a good real estate attorney if they're wanting to get into like the syndication type?
Don't go in there trying to know more than, or act like you know more than you know. Just tell them what you want to do. Like, hey, I want to buy this building. I don't have any money. I want to raise the money from private investors. I need to raise $50,000. I want to give them preferred return, and I want to have their money back to them in 7 years. Tell them what you want to do. That's what you're paying them for, is to figure out how to do it. So let them figure out how to do it. As far as putting this paperwork together, I would get on these podcasts. I would get on, Bigger Pockets, and ask around your local metropolitan market, small town attorneys. Generally, a small town attorney, I love small town attorneys. Like this is not a criticism, but they generally have to do a bunch of different stuff to stay afloat. Like they're going to do, they probably either do business, civil litigation, and maybe criminal, or they'll do family and criminal. But they're always going to have to do 2 or 3 practices to stay afloat. Whereas when you get into a bigger area, you can find an attorney that only does syndications. He can specialize because they have the volume to support that practice. And so I would do some research in your area and interview 3 or 4 of them, and just pay attention to the ones that let you talk, the ones that you click with. I mean, you'll just like everything else, you will find an attorney that sort of understands what you're trying to do. And you may want to talk to an accountant as well, because the accounting questions are going to be just as important as your legal questions, And so maybe try and loop in your accountant. And if your accountant can't handle a syndication, you need another accountant.
Right.
And so it's not that complicated. It's a partnership agreement. It's nowhere near as complicated as like a fund. But you do need to navigate the SEC rules when it comes to advertising. You need someone that's familiar with the 506B, the 506C, and typically those attorneys are not your general practitioners. They're going to be someone that specializes in that. And so I wouldn't go in there with any questions. I would go in there with, this is what I want to do, and they'll have the questions for you. They'll sort of drive the process and organize it in a manner that hopefully meets your goals. That's how I would do it.
Cool. Right on. Yeah, those good tips. So with this commercial deal, Avery Investments is born, and fast forward to now, where are you guys at now? How many units you guys have coming down the pipeline?
So we've got 63 units that we're closing on in December 3rd. That's Goose Creek, South Carolina. We've got 42 units we're closing on December 23rd. That's in Lexington, South Carolina. And then 32 units in Somerville. We're looking to close that in January. We have 10 units. Like we got a 10 unit that we're also closing in January, but that's right in our backyard. Now, we're at a point now to where it doesn't really make sense to do anything less than 30 or 40 units. It takes just as long to close a 6 unit, as it does a 106 unit. And so we're trying to, make sure that we're using the highest and best use of our time. But this particular 10 unit is right in our backyard. It's a phenomenal location, and it's the ugliest building right downtown. And I've always wanted to, shape it up. And so we're taking on that as well.
Okay, cool. So how did you guys kind of land on South Carolina as a market?
So I was stationed there temporarily in the Coast Guard, and I've always loved Charleston area. And I've been experimenting, looking around, researching other growth markets. I mean, I love Maine. I live in Maine. I'll always have a place in Maine, in my heart. But it's a dying state. It's a huge state. Square mileage, and it only has 1 million people.
Wow.
Not many people are moving here, if anybody. Most people are actually leaving. And so we started looking at different areas. We're looking at Boston, New York, but the South Carolina made a lot of sense because I felt like a lot of the infrastructure was starting to be built. I mean, there's a Volvo plant that's going in. Google just moved there. It sort of feels like Austin, Texas did in 2000, or I imagine it did in 2000, or
Right.
maybe early or maybe mid 90s. To where it was starting to get consistent growth. I just think we're in a good phase for South Carolina right now in the market, and I think 40 people move there every day. And so with market conditions like that, it's you can, I think you can afford a little bit extra risk. And so what we did was we developed a relation. I had a buddy down there who I've been talking about deals with for a while, and he has a construction background. And so and I trusted him. I would trust him with a home equity line against my house. And so he handles all the construction management, the value add piece. And then I handle all the finance side. So we're raising money. We are sponsoring the loans. And so it's been a really phenomenal partnership. We closed an 18 unit in August. And we found that deal. Basically, his buddy had it under contract. And unfortunately, his wife, or he was going through some personal issues. And so he ended up calling us and saying, "Hey, I can't close this deal. Do you guys want to take it over? Could you just throw me some equity?" And we said, "Yeah." And so he assigned the contract to us. We closed the deal in just August 28th. And that was just an 18 unit, which really gave us an opportunity to sort of test our processes, and see if the partnership was going to work without getting too hurt, if it went sour. We bought that property for $740,000 and needed $180,000 of capital improvements. And so we raised $250,000 on that deal, just all outside private investors. And so that was a small enough deal to test the waters, make sure the partnership was solid, and test our processes. So they have found 2 of the deals just through word of mouth, chatting. We found a deal through a newsletter. We sent out a newsletter and got a response back that led us to a deal. We found the 63 unit. My partners were managing 20 unit. They have their own management company down there as well, and they're managing the building right across from the 63 unit. And they just developed a relationship with the current seller. That was an off-market deal. And so it's all been word of mouth. It's all been relationships and going direct to seller for the most part.
Okay. Yeah. That's awesome. Again, coming back to the networking, right? You're just talking to people, you see somebody, you talk and expand on little conversations, and it leads to you going to have 1,000 units before too long. So that's great. So where are you guys going? Are you going to continue on this obviously multifamily path in your syndication company, and you just want to get into bigger and bigger deals down the road?
Yeah, I think that again, trying to use the highest and best use of our time. Trying to do deals that are 40 units or more makes the most sense. Our goal is 1,000 units, and we want to try and do that in the next 3 or 4 years. So that's either 250 units or 334 units a year per year, depending on if the goal is 3 or 4. But so that sort of forces you, your goals sort of drive you, right? So they sort of force you into these bigger deals. And I think that the 1,000 units that strikes a lot of boxes. It ticks a lot of boxes. It gets all the partners well, it builds a really good foundation for your business, right? It's enough revenue coming in so that you can really focus on where you want to grow. You're not going to be with 1,000 units. You can't be in the weeds every day. And so it really forces you to build out your business with a solid foundation and force you to build good processes. And
Right.
so, and we landed on that number because that would produce enough income to hit everybody's goals. And so,
Cool. Are you gonna stick to the South Carolina area, or are you guys looking at other areas to possibly move into?
I'll do a deal anywhere that the numbers work. We're looking for partners. We're always looking for partners. If somebody has a deal out there that they want to do, we'll certainly entertain it as long as the numbers works. And as long as the numbers work and we can figure out a system, and always interested in having a conversation. But I think most of our focus is North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. That area seems to be some opportunities there.
Right. Cool. Right on, man. Well, let's move to our next little section. What is what is your favorite resource to learn more about real estate? When there's something you don't know, is it podcasts, books, seminars? What do you like to do?
Man, I've got a book. So I read every day. I generally refer to it, but it's called Real Estate Finance and Investments by Dr. Peter Linneman. He's a professor. It's his book that he uses in his class, and it's a phenomenal book. I mean, he touches on everything. It's boring, but it has all the pertinent information that, and I'm generally used to boring information. I'm an attorney, right?
Yeah.
And so what annoys me is I get into these, you read an apartment building, a book, you read a book about how to get rich on apartments or whatever.
Yeah.
And the first 5 chapters are like just fluff,
Right.
It's like 50 pages of trying to convince you to invest in apartments. It's like, I don't need that. Like, I'm already convinced. If you're already convinced, like, this is the book where the rubber hits the road. And so it sort of skips over all the fluff. This podcast, I listen to this podcast, Bigger Pockets, a newer podcast, The Making of a DM by Mark Evans. That's more of a mindset podcast, but he has his prior business has been in real estate, and so that's a good one.
Cool. Right
and
on.
I use this app every day. It's called Easy Calculators. It's a free app. It gives you calculations for the time value of money, loan calculations. I use that calculator every day.
All right. Well, perfect. That was my next question, was what is a favorite app that you have? So you got it. You're on top of the ball. What would be your best advice for somebody that's just wants to get into, let's dig into, say, the best advice for somebody wanting to get into syndication, because that's kind of where you guys are headed. What would be their kind of a first step they can do?
Well, syndication, you don't have to do $1 million to be a syndicator, right? You can do a $250,000 4 unit. I would say that you need to start wherever you are. And what that means is the banks answer that question for you in a lot of ways. Traditionally, you can't get a loan for more than your net worth. So if your net worth not a million, if you're trying to get $1 million loan with $150,000 net worth, you're not going to qualify under most underwriting standards. Maybe you get into a Fannie Mae agency debt where they let some stuff slide, but your local community bank, they're traditionally not going to lend you more than your net worth. So that answers your question, right? You look at your net worth. That's probably the biggest deal you can do, unless you bring on a sponsor, unless you bring on somebody with higher net worth to also sponsor the loan with you. And so, look at where you are and try and figure out, what can I do? If it's house hacking, then you can buy a duplex. And those rules don't necessarily apply to a single family home, to a duplex, to a triplex, or to a quad. Because they're considered residential dwellings versus 5 and more, that's considered commercial. And so the residential rules aren't necessarily that strict, but the commercial side, generally their underwriting is going to require your net worth to be equal to the deal.
Mm-hmm.
So look at where you are, and look at if you're not where you want to be, can you bring on somebody that is, and try to find a deal that seems like you can take it down.
So find the deal first.
What's that?
Find the deal first. If you got
It's
a good
chicken
deal.
and the egg thing, right? I don't know the answer to that. I would certainly put some feelers out there, and ask around to your network on, look, if I were to put a deal together, would what would be your investment criteria? I would always ask your investors questions. That's the way I would do it is, hey, if I were to find a deal, what would have to look like for you to invest? And so if you can get it, if your net worth, you can get a loan sponsor for $500,000 and try to find a deal in that range, you're typically going to have to raise 25% of that. And so, right off the bat, you're going to have to raise sort of $60,000, $75,000. Or sorry, $120,000, $130,000. If you can bring on someone that's worth a couple $1,000,000, then starting out syndicating, I would not do a bigger deal first, because unless you can put in the proper infrastructure, because managing a 4-unit, managing a 6-unit, even 9-unit is completely different than managing a 100-unit.
Right.
It's way more complex. It's a business that has full-time employees, generally full-time employees. And so I would go in with typically a smaller deal just to start building a track record if you're just starting out syndication. So
cool. Right on.
Long-winded.
No, it's okay. There's a lot in there though. That's good. I'm sure we'll find some good use out of it. What about influencers? Somebody that you follow online that gives a lot of good advice. You kind of take what they have to say to heart.
My wife, number one.
Yeah.
And then I like Mark Evans. He's legit.
Cool.
He's always got those little nuggets.
Yeah. All right. And Nick, where else can people find more about you and Avery Investments if they want to invest and start making some money?
Well, averyinvestments.me, just join the Investors Club. We're just basically, that's where we send all of our offering memorandums. I'm on Instagram, Avery Investments, or Bosley's dad, Bosley_dad, on Instagram, Facebook, Nick Brown and Avery Investments. I'm all over.
Okay, cool. Well, Nick, I appreciate you being here. There's a lot of info in there. You kind of came from no real estate background. Now you're doing big things. So it's pretty inspiring story. I appreciate it. And thanks for being here, man.
Absolutely, Justin. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Nick. Nick, have a great day.
All right. See ya.
Bye.